The recording. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Denise Savageau, and I am the chair of the Water Planning Council's Advisory Group Outreach and Education Committee. And we're excited to continue our webinar series. We do the webinar series with the Water Planning Council, the Water Planning Council Advisory Group, and to help us implement the state water plan and making sure that we're doing that education, community outreach on a host of topics related to protecting the water resources in the state of Connecticut. So our workshop today is part of our 2026 webinar series, which is on realizing resilient watersheds. And today, the workshop is focused on controlling non-point source pollution and very specifically looking at the state of Connecticut's 319 program, which is the clean water, which is the section of the Clean Water Act that deals with non-point source pollution, as well as then some examples from the North Central Conservation District on implementing non-point source programs that funded through the 319. So we have two exciting speakers today that I'm going to introduce. Our first speaker is going to be Marlene Criffel. Now that I asked her to say it, I'm going to mess up her name. Kryfiski, and is an environmental analyst at Connecticut DEP's Water Planning and Management Division, where her primary role focuses on the duties surrounding the administration of Connecticut's allocation of the Federal Clean Water Act Section 319H Non-Point Source Management Grant. So we're going to start with Marlene, and then we have Alyssa Barroso. She's the natural resource scientist at the North Central Conservation District. She's a certified soil scientist and also acts as a municipal wetland agent for some of the municipalities that are served by the Soil and Water Conservation District with the North Central Conservation District. So we're pleased to have both of the ladies with us as our speakers, and I'm going to turn it over to Marlene to start. Marlene? And I'll stop
Thank you,
sharing my
Denise.
screen.
Nope. And I will start sharing. Okay. I'm hoping that tab goes away. Can you see that black panel at the top? Or is that just on my screen?
We're good. Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. Thanks again, Denise, for the introduction and for all of you for having me here to talk about Connecticut's administration of the 319 grant program. A little bit of background. The 1987 amendments to the Clean Water Act established the Section 319 Non-Point Source Grant Program because there was a need to address federal leadership to help focus state and local non-point source efforts. Under Section 319H of the Clean Water Act, states, territories, and tribes can all receive grant money to address non-point source water pollution from a variety of pollutants, so bacteria, nutrients, sediment, heavy metals, salt, and other contaminants. The funds are provided to states, territories, and tribes to implement their approved non-point source management program. Connecticut's current program plan covers the years 2025 to 2029 and will be revised at the end of that cycle. Each year, EPA awards Section 319 funds to each state in accordance with a state-by-state allocation formula. For that formula, Connecticut's designated allocation is about 0.9% of the total federal Section 319 budget. And in order to receive that funding, each year the state has to meet certain milestones. While the funding comes from the federal government, the decisions on how to spend that funding are made at the state level. We submit a proposed funding plan to EPA for approval, and if that plan is consistent with both our state program plan and the EPA non-point source guidelines, the two guiding documents for the program, then EPA may award the state funding. Because each state is making these decisions, if you're working across state boundaries, or maybe if you're a town with neighbors in another state, you might notice that the other states have a slightly different procedure than Connecticut. I also briefly mentioned tribal nations. There's also a separate pot of tribal non-point source funding that's separate from the state allocation for federally recognized tribes. At this time, none of the federally recognized tribes in Connecticut have non-point source programs. The chart on the right-hand side there shows the grant dollars in millions since the program began. As you can see, it started out with a small pot of money, went up, and has kind of plateaued in the recent years. And since Connecticut's allocation is based on that formula, our trend follows the same trend as that chart. On an annual basis, Connecticut Deep posts a notice of funding to solicit applications for our grant program. That's usually posted in late fall, early winter. We're looking for projects in two categories, planning or implementation. Planning refers to projects that develop some kind of document about non-point source pollution or build capacity in a watershed. A lot of these projects are development of what EPA calls watershed-based plans. So these contain the elements that EPA requires per their guidance and identify water quality concerns and specific implementation actions to address those concerns. Implementation projects, on the other hand, are kind of the in-the-ground projects that you think of that actually have pollutant load reductions. So thinking of bioretention systems like a rain garden, pervious paving projects, agricultural non-point source projects, just to mention a few. And in order to receive funding for those implementation projects, those projects need to be mentioned in an approved watershed-based plan. The map on the left right there shows the approved watershed-based plans in Connecticut as of right now. It doesn't include the pending or in progress ones. So those are the areas that would be eligible for 319 implementation funding at this time. We also have a list of all of the watershed-based plans with links on our website. So if you're looking to pursue a project, that's a great place to start. If that list is hard to navigate, you can always reach out to us to better understand if you're already in one of those watershed areas or maybe if there's a watershed-based plan in progress in your area. The recent funding milestones have been based on our non-point source management program plan, so things like implementation projects in priority watersheds, projects with co-benefits like ones that have climate resiliency elements, or projects that will have a high impact or are ready to go, shovel ready. There's also a caveat that we can't set aside all of our funding for planning projects. EPA does limit that amount. So the chart on the bottom there shows kind of how that split has worked in the last few years, while the total project amount has been hovering in the $1.2 million area. The vast majority of that funding does go to those implementation projects with a smaller piece going towards planning projects. If you're looking to pursue a project, maybe thinking about how your municipality or your organization can work these into a 5 or 10-year plan of your own, a great place to start is that list of approved watershed-based plans. Those plans will already have locations and specific best management practices identified for non-point source pollution. And then another place to start is the Connecticut Non-Point Source Management Program Plan, which outlines all of the milestones that Connecticut has for the next few years, targeting things such as agricultural non-point source pollution, runoff from developed lands. We have sections about hydromodification and other common non-point source pollutants. To give a little bit of more context, just of what our program has been doing lately, these are 3 projects that wrapped up in the last funding cycle. The first was a planning project with Yukon Clear to develop a guide about green stormwater infrastructure and low impact development at state parks. And this guide has already been used by one pilot project that was done with another funding source to implement some green infrastructure during a larger repaving project at a state park. The next one, Coppermine Brook Stormwater Management Improvements, was granted to the Farmington River Watershed Association as an implementation project. They installed a 300-foot bioswale with plantings as well as several tree filters at Edgewood School. And that project also had a really big public outreach component where they reached out to both members of the town of Bristol and they had some education events for the children that used Edgewater School. And they also developed a really in-depth learning guide about the plants that could be used in these kinds of systems. And then lastly is kind of an ongoing effort in the Lake Pocatapog watershed where they recently installed BMPs at 5 sites, including some plantings, some permanent berms based on the Lake Pocatapog watershed-based plan. And in total, since 2020, the town has been able to install 12 BMPs, including the 5 that were part of this project. So as you can see, a variety of funding. These are both relatively smaller implementation projects. We've had some larger ones funded recently too, including the one that Alyssa will be talking about shortly. And then I also just wanted to give a timeline, since I know that's probably on your minds when you're thinking about what you have the capacity to fund in any given year. I base this timeline off of federal fiscal year 25 just because that grant has already been decided. We already have some projects that are contracted and have started. So for fiscal year 25, we published a request for proposal in November of 2024, and the deadline was set for February of 2025. So the applicants had about 3 months to think of projects, to send us questions, and to send that final application. On November 7th, along with posting the RFP on our webpage, we also sent out a notice via the Connecticut Deep Water Quality Listserv. If you're not already subscribed to that and are interested in this kind of grant funding, I highly recommend that. The next few months, Connecticut Deep and EPA conduct reviews. We send an official application, and then a few months later, we receive a notice of award. And that following October 1st, the funding becomes available, and we send notices to the applicants who were selected, notifying them if they were selected for what funding amount, whether it was the entirety of their project or maybe we did a partial funding. And at the same time, we also send emails to those that did not receive grant awards for that year. Our current goal is to get contracts drafted shortly after, about 6 months or so from when the notices go out. So in this example, I used a project that was fully contracted by March of 2026. That project then has 2 years to completion. 2 years is our average project duration. Some projects might be simpler, might be a little bit shorter, and some projects might be more extensive construction projects that require some extra time. 2 years isn't a locked-in time frame. It's just kind of the average that we've been working with. So over the next 2 years, that grantee will submit us quarterly reports to our program. They'll submit deliverables, so that might be draft documents, final documents, design plans, photos of the project if it's an implementation project, those kind of things. And they'll also be sending us invoices for work that's been done. The contract expires 2 years later, and at that point, they'll have to submit a final report and some final financial reporting. And it's really important to just mention that no work can happen before the contract is signed or after the contract expiration. All of the work that you're looking to have funded with the 319 grant has to occur during that contracted window. From our perspective, the federal grant funding also expires after a few years. So this project is well within that window. The funding expires in 2030. We're trying to contract sooner so that we're not pushed up against the date when the federal funding expires. In the past, we've contracted later and kind of been pushed up against that. And it's just created some stressful situations, especially when there might be some unforeseen circumstances like staff changes, local elections, the pandemic, just to name a few that might result in having to extend the contract and then just being pushed up to the last possible minute. We're also hoping that by contracting sooner, your cost estimates based in your application are closer to what they actually are. We know that rising costs have been a huge topic on everybody's mind. So in summary, from the day that the application is due, we anticipate moving towards contract within a year. So just to be aware of that when you're thinking of when you might be ready for this kind of grant. And then, as with every grant, there's just some things to keep in the back of your mind. The first and foremost is whether you're an eligible entity for the grant. You have to be registered with the Connecticut Secretary of State. So groups include local and state government, quasi-state agencies, schools, universities, nonprofits, community groups. Tribes can also apply to the state 319 program. Grantees are responsible for acquiring any permits, authorizations, and agreements for their projects. So when you're thinking about your project timeline, just being sure to incorporate that into what your plan is. This is a big one. Stormwater permit requirements, so your MS4 permit requirements are unfortunately not eligible for Section 319 funding, but addressing stormwater issues above and beyond the permit requirements can be funded. The past few years, the trend that we've seen is that uh, grant awards have been between $70,000 and $600,000 for projects, so a pretty big range. There's no specific minimum or maximum. It just that when you get to that lower end of the project, just a question of whether you'll be able to meet all of the deliverables with that amount of funding. This is a grant that has a cost sharing element to it. So we do encourage grantees to provide non-federal match when possible, but we don't want that to be a barrier to entry. So if your organization is unable to provide match, reach out to us during that application window of early winter to early spring. As a reminder, match can be state or local funding, but also from in-kind services, volunteer efforts, and other sources. And lastly, I covered this a bit on the timeline slide, but there's some paperwork requirements for this grant, so just making sure that you have the capacity for that. And then I just wanted to share some resources that EPA's Nonpoint Source program has on their webpage. The first is the Handbook for Developing Watershed Plans to Restore and Protect Our Waters. That gives you the elements that EPA is looking for and kind of walks you through what a watershed-based plan should include. The second is the pollutant load estimation tool. Some organizations will use that tool for the load reductions when developing a watershed-based plan. That's also the tool that we'll be using for implementation projects to calculate load reductions at the completion of a project. Um, Probably the coolest of these to me is How's My Waterway? It's a tool where you can type in a location. So for this example, I grabbed Broadbrook, where Alyssa's project is taking place, and you can see whether there's a watershed-based plan. You can see what water quality impairments are in that watershed and what those impairments are related to. You can even see permitted sources in the watershed. And most importantly to our program, you can see the projects that have gone on in that watershed. So for example, you can see the Broadbrook Ag Waste construction title right there to the right. And if you click that, you can read some more details about each project. And then lastly, the success stories on EPA's website is a place where each state can report on how 319 funding or other non-point source funding has helped contribute to the improvement of water quality across their state. Connecticut currently has 8 stories in there, but we're hoping to have more, especially as some of these larger projects wrap up. And that is it for me. My email, as well as our program email address, are provided on this slide. And then the QR code links to that bottom link right there. That is our landing page for our 319 grant program. And I think I'll hand it off to Alyssa now.
Yeah, thanks, Marlene. And we're going to hold questions till the end. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, but we'll also have you be able to raise your hand and ask questions at the end. So we'll turn it over to Alyssa. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marlene. That was awesome and goes very, very well into what I'm going to present about today. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes, we're good. Yes, we're good,
Okay,
Alyssa.
great. So yeah, I'm going to be basically presenting about sort of a real world application of an organization, NCCD, that utilizes 319 funds all the time. So yeah, let's get into it. My name's Alyssa Barroso. Denise already covered this, but I'm a natural resource scientist, soil scientist, and my email's there. It'll also be at the end of this presentation. So we're going to start with an introduction to conservation districts, because I just find that a lot of people kind of don't know what we do and who we are. We're going to go into a case study, like Marlene had mentioned, about Broadbrook, and that's a recently completed project funded in part by 319. And we're also going to go into some past projects and future goals, which of course is to continue implementing these awesome projects. So who is NCCD? What do we do? I made this little printout. I bring this to conferences and such, but I thought it would be good to have here. So conservation districts are a local arm that manages and protects local resources, soil, water, forests, wetlands. We provide education and assistance to residents and municipalities. And we just provide vital services, including implementing and supporting these projects at a range of scales, from really, really small to really, really large, as you'll see. And yeah, we help people and wildlife to create sustainable systems for local communities. So the first conservation district was established in 1937. We were sort of born out of the Dust Bowl era, where there was obviously a real need to protect our soil and water for, the health of our communities. And then Connecticut's were established in 1946. We have 5 of them, and there's more than 3,000 across the nation. In a lot of other states, they're based on county, so there will be county soil and water conservation districts. But for us, it's not anymore based on county. You can actually see them here. So North Central Conservation District is that green one right here, with the red arrow pointing to it. But all of these districts are full of really awesome people. Try to find your district if you're able to. So yeah, we're a really small nonprofit, and we provide conservation-based services to residents and municipalities within our district. We're non-regulatory, and Denise likes to call us quasi-governmental. So we have an on-staff soil scientist, which is just me, an erosion control specialist, an arborist, and other experts as well. And we're all very passionate about what we do, and we're here to help you. So really, utilize your local conservation district. And we utilize grants like 319 to implement projects to help our community and conserve natural resources. So that's what we do. And I'll just refer to us as NCCD from here on out. So let's go into this case study. This is a major project that we completed recently, using in part 319 funds. So this was at Roaring Brook Farm in Ellington. So in 2010, NRCS had completed a watershed management plan for Broad Brook, which is notably impaired, especially for nitrogen. There's a lot of farms in that area. So in 2017, with 319 funds, NCCD completed a phase 2 watershed plan to identify site-specific implementation projects. So where we could actually go to really start improving this watershed. So in 2020, we were initially awarded almost $500,000 of 319 funding, and the original focus was on a manure storage project for Roaring Brook Farm. Now we get to 2025, we got even more money from 319, as well as additional funding sources, mainly NRCS. NRCS provided a lot of not only monetary value, but also they had engineers and people in the field with us, directing the project. So yeah, we had more 319 and other funding sources that we leveraged, and basically a total overhaul of Roaring Brook Farm was completed. So I want to show you some before, during, and after pictures. Actually, first we'll go into this. So this was an interpretive sign that I had made. This is actually posted now on one of the barns that we built. But so yeah, hopefully everyone could see as I zoom in here. But this is basically the overview of what was existing and what's there now. So yeah, there was just a heifer barn before, and now there's a whole waste storage facility, a freestall barn, and a milking parlor. And basically the issue here was that Roaring Brook Farm had no waste storage at all. So what they would have to do was spread manure all over their fields, regardless of nutrient needs and regardless of weather. So they had basically nowhere to put their poop. So they would have to put it on their fields all the time. And that, of course, if you have a storm coming right after you spread that manure, it's going to run off directly into this brook. So the brook that surrounds them is called Kimball's Brook. That's a direct tributary to Broad Brook, which goes to the Scandic, and of course the Connecticut. So yeah, this is basically what we did. We had this existing heifer barn, and before this was all bare soil. You'll see in the next slide that cows literally were in the brook, inside of it. So that's just, of course, a direct source of pollution. So after project implementation, we had this really great waste storage facility and a place for the cows to be inside and be protected from the elements and from flies. And we also planted those areas that were just kind of barren soil. So yeah. And like I had mentioned, this is the drainage sequence up here. And yeah, so now the farm has 6 months of waste storage. So manure can be spread when it actually needs to be. It can be spread intentionally and at sort of with the needs of the farm instead of just needing to do it every day. So yeah, it's a really big project. So I'll show you some before, during, and afters. So like the cows were in the brook. I really mean in the brook. So look at this cute little lady here. But yeah, so of course, clearly there was a need for the cows and their manure to be kept away from the brook, because that's just a really direct source of nitrogen pollution. You can also see here, there's absolutely no riparian buffer at all. The disturbance from the cows grazing, or, you know, their hooves has sort of gotten rid of any vegetation that would be there. So not only is there manure going directly into the brook, but also that sediment is just getting loaded directly in whenever any sort of rain event happens. So there's a real need to protect this area as a tributary to Broad Brook. So these are some during construction shots, just, you know, pouring concrete, all that typical stuff. And then we have after. So this is some really awesome drone shots we got of kind of the overview. And we have this beautiful scrape alley here. And that's kind of where the ladies will be housed. And there's some ventilation there. I think they'll be a lot happier with their new digs. And this is really the big thing. So this was the start of the project, and this was like the biggest goal of the project. And of course we went above and beyond, but this was the waste storage facility, and you can see it's in use right now, all of that manure sludge. So just think, every single drop of that manure prior to implementation of this project would have been spread on those fields and subsequently run off directly into the brook. So there's now the farm has 6 months of manure storage now, so they can spread it when they actually need to. So that's really great. That alone is a ton of nutrients saved from being in there. And then yeah, the freestall barn here, there's a milking parlor, and the efficiency was increased so much for Roaring Brook Farm that they were actually able to decrease the number of cattle in their herd. So that also decreases pollution as well. So I want to show you some of our past projects and our future goals with 319. So these are some of our past projects that were funded fully by 319. We hit a lot of different watersheds here. Some of them are watershed-based plans, some of them are implementation projects like stormwater basins or bioretention areas. But these are all really awesome. They kind of go all over our district, and yeah, these have been really great. These are from, I believe, 2009 or so till today. And this is just a selection of what we've done. So I won't go through all of them, but you can kind of see some of the good things that we've done with 319, thanks to 319. So this is just one example of kind of our intention with our future with 319. So we recently used a grant from the Long Island Sound Futures Fund to complete a watershed management plan, also known as a watershed-based plan, update for the North Branch Park River in Hartford. So we were also just awarded, and I mean just like a couple days ago, just awarded a Long Island Sound Ecosystems grant to design a conceptual project from this plan. So we're kind of in the conceptual stage now. So our next plan is to apply for 319 funds to actually do an implementation project in this watershed. It's right in Hartford, so it's very impaired with just the population density there, the amount of impervious surface. So it's an impaired urban watershed, so it really does need some TLC. So this is just one way that we plan to use 319 in the future, but of course we intend to use it as long as the funding's there, because it is a really great program. As you can see, it's been a major source of funding for some of our most impactful projects, and we intend to continue leveraging these funds to reduce NPS pollution and improve water quality for generations to come. So we really couldn't do what we do without 319. So thank you so much. And there's my email. Reach out to me.
Thanks, Alyssa. So I'm going to ask Marlene to come back on as well and just say if anybody has any questions. Do we have anything in the chat, or if you would like to raise your hand? Um,
Hi,
there's a
Denise. I have a
yeah, go
few.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Allie.
Um, this question I think is for Marlene. Can all tribes apply? I'm assuming state designated tribes or only recognized tribes able to apply?
The federally recognized ones are the only ones that could have their own non-point source program, so they would be receiving funding directly from EPA, but they would also have to have their own non-point source program, which is a lot of work for those tribes. My understanding, based on the way that other states have worked, just because we haven't experienced this in Connecticut in the past, is that state recognized tribes are eligible as applicants to the state program, as long as they're registered with the Department of the Secretary of State.
Okay. Another question also for Marlene. It's a two-parter. Do agricultural land use projects or high impact projects need to be listed in a watershed-based plan to be eligible for 319 funds? And then on top of that, what determines a high impact project?
The EPA guidelines do state that it has to be an approved watershed-based plan or alternative plan. So if there's another kind of plan that mentions those projects that might not be a 9-element plan, it's still worth bringing up and maybe seeing how we can get that moved forward as an alternative plan just to have those count. But they are supposed to be mentioned in some sort of planning project. And I think your second question was what constitutes a high impact project. Just something that will have the large potential for water quality improvements. So one example that I think Chris Bellucci talked about at our last session here was a rain garden in Hamden. It's a very large rain garden, but it's also in a location that has a lot of impervious surface nearby. So it captures a lot of that runoff that was otherwise running directly into a stream. So even though it wasn't maybe the most expensive project in the world, I think that one hovered under $500,000. It had a really large impact both for non-point source pollution, but also for flooding downstream. So any kind of project that may not be the biggest investment, but has a lot of benefits coming from it.
Thank you. And I have one more question, and then we can go to Robert Phillips, who has his hand raised. This is for Alyssa. Did the Conservation District reach out to the farmer for the project you highlighted, or did the farmer reach out to the Conservation District? How does the conversation for these projects typically start?
What I believe happened with that one was that NRCS had already kind of had their hand in that property. They had already realized it was really a big source of nutrients for that watershed. So NRCS was creating a conservation plan. That's just kind of the name of the general plan that they give to farms and other properties to just improve their conditions. And so they had already been doing a conservation plan for that property, which I believe would come from the farm would reach out to NRCS to get that done. And then so they were already doing that, and then the 319 funding kind of came to be. But I've seen it go both ways, where someone will reach out and we will obtain that funding for them, or we will know about a property or an area that needs help and we will approach them. So it can go both ways. For that one in particular, NRCS was kind of already there. So that's how that one went.
And let me just add, I followed this project because it was a project. People need to understand how complex that project was. because it was started with NRCS doing a conservation plan, nutrient management plan, where the farmer reached out to them and said, we need to do this work. And then, but NRCS funding, not technical assistance, because we can't underestimate the value of the conservation planners and the engineers who designed this. But once they designed it, their funding to farmers was $450,000. These types of projects range in the $2 to $3 million. And I can't remember what the final dollars was on this. Alyssa, you might know what the final dollars was.
It was roughly
But yeah,
that. It was about
yeah, it was, I think it was over 2.5 million. And the conservation district put together not only getting $319 with the NRCS dollars, but also Long Island Sound Futures Fund dollars, the farmer put in dollars. So to make this program happen, and of course, if you look at that timeline, we had the pandemic happen in the middle of it. We had a whole lot of other things happen while we were trying to get this. We've had changes in what's happening at the federal government with funding measures and whatever. So we have to salute both DEEP, EPA, who came up with funds, as well as, NRCS, but particularly the farmer who, through this whole thing, had to be looking at plans and revisions and updating contract costs, because that was a big problem. But it came out fantastic. And I know that there was a big sigh of release and celebration when it finally came to fruition. But so it's a great question, because a lot of times these types of projects don't happen overnight. And the farmer, as the landowner, has to follow along with, a lot of times, a lot of federal bureaucracy and whatever. So between the Farmer Conservation District making this happen, it's a huge project. So, and I will say that this is one that the North Central Conservation District has done, but we've had several major dairy work that has been done by other of our conservation districts, including the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District, Northwest Conservation District, all working on programs that support our dairy, because our dairy farmers really can't do this work without this support. So really, really important to recognize that. That said, the work that is being done with the 319 in the urban areas is also really important. And there's a lot of $319 that goes to urban non-point source pollution, not just the agricultural piece.
Thank you, Denise and Melissa. And again, if anyone has any more questions, feel free to put it either in the chat or the Q&A box. Robert Phillips has his hand up, so I'm going to give him permission to unmute. Robert, if you want to unmute and ask your question, you can.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually wondering how I was going to do that. You just mentioned the urban side of 319. A long time ago, I was a grad student on the Jordan Cove project down in Waterford.
Yep.
So I'm pretty familiar with that. And then I was also the town planner in Ellington for about 8 years. I don't know, 2005 to 2013. And I just had a general question about some of the projects that have happened in Ellington, for example. It's kind of technical and I don't know if there's an answer, but a couple of times a year they actually pump out what I would call a slurry that onto the fields. That's probably a mixture of manure of some sort, and maybe some other things. I'm just wondering if any of that was an issue that was investigated, or just from the direct application that could be either over a water body or close to the water body, or even from aerosol effects. I mean, when that slurry is going, you know it. So there's definitely it's a part of Ellington fabric. But I just was wondering if that was anything that was kind of played a part in any of those projects, like Roaring Brook, right in that area. That's where Oak Ridge and everything is. So, and I've been a huge proponent of farmland preservation and getting a farmland preservation development rights program in Ellington when I was there. So. Very, very supportive of all of that. So just curious. Thank you.
Alyssa, do you want to take that? You want me to handle that?
I can try. I'm not sure if
ahead.
I'll answer it very well, so I'm sure I'll need you to supplement. But yeah, that was basically the biggest part. And the reason why we initially started that Roaring Brook Farm project was because they were pumping slurry onto their fields every single day because they had no storage for it. So yeah, it's sort of a, you know, farms of course need to do it occasionally, but if they're over applying, if they're applying it every single day because they have no storage for it, then that can become that can create an impaired watershed in some cases. So yeah, it's really trying to balance, you know, farmers need to fertilize sometimes, but also not overdoing it and giving them tools like building them a waste storage facility to uh, make sure that they can do what they need to do and that we can maintain, you know, our dairies without kind of punishing them for doing the things they need to do to maintain their farm and but also preserving our water quality. So that was a big part of the Roaring Brook Farm project, for example. But yeah, Denise, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just quickly, some of the conditions when you're doing a nutrient management plan is looking at, not putting slurry or, spreading manure, on frozen ground. So that's why having that 6 month of storage so that you're not spreading on frozen ground, that you're, using it more during the growing season when the nutrients are going to be taken up, and also when there's vegetative cover. So it's, when you're looking at that, a nutrient management plan that this was part of, it takes all of that, so it's a really holistic approach. It will be looking at, and I don't know if all of this has been implemented yet, but it will be looking at fencing so that the cattle don't have direct access to streams. It will be looking at restoring those riparian buffers so that when you do apply to land, the manure to the land, that you don't have direct runoff to the stream, that you have a buffer zone between the stream and any potential runoff. But when you're looking at something like this, it's part of a total nutrient management plan for the farm that looks at all of those aspects, not just manure storage, although the manure storage is a huge piece of it, and it's a huge piece of the cost, because when you think about storing manure for 6 months, it's huge. But so it takes all of that into consideration, Robert. I don't know if
Yeah, and
anybody
then
else,
there's yeah, and then there's the transport, from field to field and stuff like that. I remember all that. It's a messy business, and it's good to hear that. I figured there were some holistic nutrient management plans. So thank you. That was great.
Okay. We have a question from Carol Haskins, and then I'll jump over to Maggie, who has her hand raised. Has Connecticut considered any legislative restrictions on manure application in the winter? Are any of you familiar?
Yeah, I will just say I'm not aware of any restrictions per se. There are restrictions that farmers have to follow. So if there's a known pollutant and it is identified by DEEP, DEEP can come in and say, "Hey, you need to work on this," using their Clean Water Act authority. That said, normally what they do, because we want, it's one of those things. We have a ag waste problem, but we also want to make sure that we're supporting local food supply, right? So it's like we've got two competing interests: clean water as well as local food supply. And that's where they work with the soil and water conservation districts and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. And DEP has staff that very specifically works with dairy farmers and works closely with both the conservation districts and NRCS on these issues. And the idea is that, okay, how do we make this work without having it be a regulatory burden, but also to make sure it works? And I would think from a legislative perspective, it would be the challenge is because of the cost of these programs. That's the real challenge, because most of the farmers want to do the right thing, but the cost is so cost prohibitive. So I'll just put this out there that in other states, New York being a good example, but there are other states as well, they have not only NRCS federal dollars for this, they have state dollars to help with farmers. And some of you probably know that we just passed legislation to help do some work with dairy farmers. It was more from the marketing end, but certainly having a program that helps with the state funded programs on conservation, that would really go a long way to helping our farmers, so that because we have the federal dollars and the state manages those and gives us those through the 319 program, but having state funding as the match would be a great thing for us. So
Okay, thank you, Denise. Maggie, you have your hand raised and you should be able to unmute if you'd like to ask your question.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to say thank you very, very much for this program. And I have a next step question. So we have cows in the brook situation, generating a nutrient problem there. It's actually a cows in the wetlands situation, because there's a whole wetlands complex and a brook, and it drains into one of the main tributaries to the Mystic River. So the neighbors have over the years attempted to advise, intervene, provide support, because the cows also are escaping it. And so it's been a matter of conversation in the neighborhood. Is our next step to go to NRCS and ask them if they will take a look at it? Because the field where the cows are is owned by someone who's not a farmer. And the cows are in there kind of as a rental. They're using that fenced space.
So one of the things that I always do is tell, folks who are involved in watershed work, start with the local soil and water conservation district. They'll bring in NRCS. They'll find out if NRCS is already working with the farmer. And there is, that fine line, because it's like, okay, so who's renting the land? Are they aware of the challenges? They're the ones ultimately responsible. Obviously, the farmer's also responsible, but if DEEP gets involved, for example, and they find there's a water quality problem, DEP could, be working with the farmer, but also the landowner. So I always say start with the local soil and water conservation district. They have the local board. A lot of times they're the ones who kind of can play this, I would say, intermediary role, between the farmer, the regulated community in terms of working with DEP, but also with NRCS, because their offices are often co-located. So start there, express the concerns, because it's hard to know about every farm that's out there, or every, and sometimes farms change and whatever, but okay, we're working with them. Sometimes there's a plan in place and folks don't know it, and it just takes, so for example, you saw the timeline, how long it took to do the Roaring Brook project. So sometimes there's something in place while working on it, but it just takes a while to get all of the pieces in place. So I would start there. They're the local, that's the locally led, the districts are set up and actually named in the Farm Bill, which is federal legislation, to be the locally led voice. So it's like, go there, they're the local voice, they'll take it up the chain, both to DEP as well as NRCS. How do we work with this farmer?
Yeah, I just want to add, Maggie, you said Mystic River? That's
Yes, yeah.
Yes,
So
it's
yeah, you're going to be Eastern Connecticut Conservation District.
that's right.
Just yeah. So
It-
if
But
you
that's not
honestly just put into
what
Google-
Denise meant by the local soil and water conservation district.
Yes, that is the Eastern Connecticut
That's
Conservation
what you meant.
District.
Okay.
Yep,
All right, good. Thank you.
yep.
All right, I do not see any other questions. So I think we're all set. Thank you, Marlene and Alyssa. And a recording will be sent out later today, hopefully with the slides as well. And all the links included in the slides, will be accessible.
And I just want to say that we have our theme of realizing resilient watersheds. It's going to be continuing. Our next workshop will be June 12th. We're going to be releasing the information on that. We will wait until this one was over, and we're going to be releasing in the next day or two. If not this afternoon, tomorrow we'll be releasing the information on that, and that is on dam removal and restoring our rivers by removing dams. That one's going to be really interesting with a case study on the Kinneytown Dam removal project. So looking forward to that. So stay tuned, and you'll see you'll be able to get a link for that as well. And we'll be sending that out shortly.
Thank you.